Welcome to episode 31 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and it's kind of cold in Austin. It was in the 30s, and so I'm wearing a skull cap that my friends in Latvia gave me last year. I would have normally been at the 5G Detectory event, but I supported that virtually this year. And actually, this is a Latvian phrase that literally translates to go find mushrooms, which is kind of their way of saying, sog off. So anyway, just wanted to bring that perspective into the podcast this week. Anshel, thanks for joining, and let's get started. So my first topic this week, Nokia continues to drive momentum with its private networking business unit. This week, Bosch Global, Bosch is a big German manufacturer of, power tools and very quiet dishwashers. I've owned one before. They're intending to partner with Nokia to launch over 250 private 5G networks. And this is to support manufacturing automation and that sort of thing. And that's really, from my perspective, one of the very compelling use cases for 5G private networking. Have you been following that news at all, Anshel?
So I didn't follow that announcement specifically, but I've been following the trend of Nokia working with industrial partners to launch private 5G networks. Mm-hmm. I think that they are clearly establishing themselves as the market leader and experts in deploying private 5G. And I think that they want to be the partner that companies come to when they want to deploy a private 5G network, once they understand what a private 5G network offers, and that Nokia is the leader in that space.
Yeah, no, I think they've been at it, longer than others. I'm actually, I've been briefed by their team. I'm getting a deeper dive on, their strategy as they enter next year. And I hope to kind of bring some of that perspective, back into a future podcast. But yeah, clearly it's a shining spot for the company. I mean, there have been some missteps. There were some additional executive departures most recently. So Pekka, and I forget his last name, he's the new CEO that's taken over for Rajeev Suri. He's putting a new management team in place to go address some of the shortcomings. But I continue to expect that private cellular networking will be a bright spot for Nokia. So we'll keep our eyes on that. And as I mentioned, as I learn more and have more insights, I'll bring those into the podcast. But let's shift to your first topic this week. And you want to talk about Snapdragon. They had a pretty big launch just recently, right?
Yeah, so this week, Qualcomm launched the Snapdragon 888 or 888 or 8888, whichever way you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And this is their new flagship processor. Traditionally, they do this event in Hawaii, so I'm not in Hawaii this week, which I normally would be. And as a result, it was a virtual event. They sent out nice care packages to everybody who would be attending with, candles and lotion and a tiki mug. I've got my Hawaii candle right here. If you're watching the video version of the podcast, you can see it. It's their new flagship processor. Usually they announce a lot of other stuff along with it, but this year they just focus on the smartphone processor. So a lot of people are believing, expecting, anticipating that maybe this is going to be the one processor they launch for all of 2021. And there might not be a specific PC one or a specific VR one. But I'm not entirely convinced that that'll be the case. However, it is going to be the fastest processor that they have in the market today. It has the latest cores from ARM. It's got a X1, which is the fastest ARM core ARM's ever built. It's still an 8-core processor design. But the real big deal, and the reason why we're talking about it, is because it has an integrated X60 5-nanometer modem from Qualcomm, which is the latest 5G modem, 3rd generation from the company. And the reason why it's a big deal is actually because, first of all, it's different from what Apple's using, which is the X55, which is the 2nd gen modem. And it has the capability of doing TDD and FDD carrier aggregation, so that it allows for 5G carrier aggregation in a way that 4G already can do. That's a big deal because 5G today, you know, comes in multiple layers of spectrum, high, mid, and low. And right now you get to choose between one of those three, but you can't actually utilize two of them together at the same time unless they're both FDD or both TDD. So
Mhm.
being able to combine both TDD and FDD spectrum is a big deal because a lot of the mid-band stuff tends to be TDD and the low-band stuff tends to be FDD. So when you're able to combine something like a, let's say T-Mobile 600 with their 2.5, you significantly increase both speeds as well as coverage. And when you have good coverage and good speeds, you have a good experience. So I think, you know, operators like AT&T are going to use their 850 with whatever 3.5 they get their hands on, and same with Verizon with their 700 and whatever 3.5 they get their hands on. So it's going to be a process, but the X60 is really the modem that will allow for much better user experience, which isn't a very sexy thing because it doesn't, you know, double the 5G speeds like we've been seeing with previous modem designs.
Mhm.
But ultimately, it will result in much higher real world performance. And I think that's going to be a really interesting comparison to show, you know, maybe at the end of 2021, as the networks continue to build out, showing the difference between a X60 modem versus an X55, showing the real benefits of having carrier aggregation across multiple bands, and also just like a better user experience overall with better coverage and being able to utilize, you know, new spectrum.
Awesome. Were there any announcements on specific design wins with OEMs?
Not really. They you know, obviously announced all the partners that they have ready and lined up. I believe one of their partners, I think it was Pocophone or Oppo, or no, it was Realme. Realme announced already that they've got a Snapdragon 888 design out and ready. But I mean, the reality is everything's going to be shipping in Q1 at the earliest, and
Hmm.
I expect that we'll see the usual suspects: Oppo, OnePlus, Xiaomi, Samsung in certain markets,
Hmm.
all kind of coming out with their iPhone, you know, competitors. And the Snapdragon 888 is probably the closest competitor to an Apple A14, especially when you consider that it has Wi-Fi 6E and has all the latest Bluetooth. You know, it's got 26 TOPS of AI. So if there is a chip to compete with A14, the Snapdragon 888 is going to be it.
Awesome. Well, Qualcomm continues to push the envelope in the 5G ecosystem. So we'll look forward to you coming back and sharing those specific design wins when they get announced early next year. Let me shift to my second topic, and I'm talking about Dish again this week. And they announced their fiber plan to support front haul and back haul transport for usual suspects. But what was interesting, Charlie Edrin, their CEO, mentioned a somewhat of a pull-in on their 5G deployment timeline from what was previously communicated as second half of next year. He actually indicated that they will begin to deploy in first quarter, calendar quarter of next year. So again, you and I have talked about, kind of the sort of schizophrenic, behavior on the part of Dish. I mean, what's going on?
Honestly, I think I think it's a lack of experience.
Yeah.
I also think that what happens in a lot of these newer companies, especially in a company like Dish, where you have a very headstrong CEO, there are certain people who are afraid to tell, you know, what's actually going on.
Hmm.
I don't really understand why they would pull it in by at least 2 quarters. Um, so it seems like there's some miscommunication there. But I think that expectation of what's possible and what's real is very hard to nail down with Dish.
Yeah.
And
Well, they clearly, the indication is, they've hired, bench strength from all different parts of the industry, from infrastructure providers and operators and that sort of thing. But to your point, the way they're going about this, they're supporting Open RAN, And as we know, standards are still coalescing there. Open RAN won't necessarily be the highest performance radio access network solution. It's definitely more CapEx, cost optimized, and brings a level of agility and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think to give them a little bit of relief, this is new for them, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, sometimes the emperor, it's the whole story about the emperor and his clothing, right? And so I think maybe some of the underlings aren't going to maybe share what they're experiencing directly with upper management, but yeah, so the ping pong ball continues to bounce, with Dish, but we'll keep our eyes on them. Let's move to your second topic this week, and you want to talk about Amazon selling 5G Faraday cages?
Yeah, so as you know, I've followed quite a few of these stories around 5G. It really fundamentally comes around a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding of what 5G is.
Yeah.
But there are resellers, there's manufacturers and resellers out there selling effectively Faraday cages that protect you and block 5G, and they're not counterfeit Chinese copies made in the USA, which is a whole other marketing ploy.
Hmm.
But really, these people are being convinced that these Faraday cages are protecting them from electric EMF, and um, honestly, the radiation is probably still happening, but the radio waves are probably not as strong. So what ends up happening is people are either getting these devices, putting them around their routers or their Wi-Fi switches or whatever their actually network equipment is, and realizing that it's completely destroying their signal strength. And then I'm like,
Shocking.
and it's like, okay, so either they buy those USB drives to protect their home from 5G waves and do absolutely
Right.
nothing, or they buy these cages and wrap their routers and their other networking equipment in it, and it doesn't have any signal anymore. And it's like, okay, either it works really well or it doesn't work at all. But in both cases, people are being ripped off, and these guys are selling these things on Amazon, and some of the reviews are actually quite amusing because these people are reporting that it kills signal strength from the router, and it's like devices that were previously located at 30 to 40 feet from the router that used to have full signal strength don't even connect to it anymore. And it's like, yeah, because you actually have a
Shocking.
Faraday cage.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this before, and we had fun with it. I think it was on our inaugural podcast. We wore the tinfoil hats, but yeah, there just continues to be a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of it is it's just plain ignorance, and people
It's
are just
fear.
being gullible. Yeah,
Well, I also think that people don't understand the technology to begin with.
yeah,
So, if you think about it, even us, unless you really get down to the physics of some of these things, it's very difficult to fully comprehend how some of these things work. And some of it does, even the engineers who do it, they're like, it's magic. And
yeah.
when people don't understand something and think it's magic, then they're much more likely to believe that there's more going on there than it appears.
Well, and I've thrown a hypothesis out there as well that might be fueling this insanity, and it's for with 5G, one of the nuances is millimeter wave, right, high band, and the fact that it's just it's not been deployed in a 4G, 3G, 2G world, and it requires lots of small cell densification because of the short propagation, but it's very high performance, right? So maybe the logic there is that the higher band, it's new, it's got this short propagation, but it's very, very performance optimized. That's going to fry my brainwaves. I don't know, but but we'll continue to keep an eye on this, and yeah, and suggest in the future any fun Faraday cage accessories, Anshel. We'll we'll be looking out for that.
I won't be
So
supporting it.
Let me hit my third topic this week, and it's sort of like a line from Dude, Where's My Car, which Ashton Kutcher he killed that movie, but this is like, Dude, where's my 5G? And I spoke in NPR on several occasions. I know you have as well. And this particular broadcast on Marketplace this past Monday was just around that, and it's around unmet expectations with 5G and all the variants and that sort of thing. And so, I spent quite a bit of time with this particular correspondent and really educated him about, hey, 5G is a journey. It's not a light switch, and there are several, steps that we're going to have to, roll through. I call it, kind of 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. You kind of refer to this first phase as the toddler phase. I think in a Forbes article that you and I both contributed to when we met with T-Mobile's Neville Ray. But I mean, the reality is, you've got different carriers focused and, deploying in different, spectrum bands. I think you're going to talk about Open Signal and their recent reporting on the performance of the top three carriers in the U.S. But the reality is, there have been different priorities. Verizon's been very focused on their ultra wideband, which is millimeter wave. T-Mobile started with their low band spectrum because they wanted to drive coverage. And so based on that, and based on which operator you subscribe to, you're going to have a different experience, right? And certainly COVID slowed some of this stuff down as well. And so, it was a great opportunity for me to speak with NPR Marketplace and sort of help educate the general public. And that's what you and I do, right? As we contribute to Forbes.
Yeah, and I mean that's why I wrote the Snapdragon 888 blog this week,
Mm-hmm.
because I thought that there were some things that people were missing about it, because there's a lot more to it than just what appears on the surface. But yeah, I think the reality is 5G is still very much in its growth phase,
Mm-hmm.
and we probably have another year or two until we really start to see what's possible with the networks, especially with only one still being standalone. So I think 2021 is going to be a very interesting year.
Yeah, I agree. All of the carriers in the U.S. will catch up, and that's going to be a segue into your final topic. But yeah, it's just a journey. It's not a light switch. But so that's a great segue to your last topic, which is the Open Signal report.
Yeah, I was going to say that just to add to your topic, that I plan on writing up a whole report on my experience of how 5G has improved over the last year, just to give people some perspective of where we started and where we're at today. But yeah, so actually leading into my topic, as you said, Open Signal did release a report yesterday. So this one's really hot off the presses. And basically they were looking at 4G and 5G speeds in 5 U.S. cities, and Open Signal uses their own network of devices. And basically, they took a look at Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T, which are the big three, and they found that now that Verizon has their DSS out, now that AT&T and T-Mobile have started to deploy more of their mid-band stuff and their other spectrum, that now they're kind of neck and neck on speeds, even though Verizon's coverage is still vastly behind AT&T and T-Mobile's.
Yeah.
So this kind of shows that, from my experience at least, that Verizon's DSS is not very fast, and that it is very much the Band-Aid that I called it.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you put a bunch of Band-Aids on something, it doesn't really look very good. And this is kind of an example of that, because now they've basically given up all their performance claims now that their average speeds have just plummeted through the floor, because they went from multi-gigabits per second to, I saw 7 to 8 megs per second on DSS, which is pretty rough. And what's interesting, though, is even when you take a look at 5G speeds from Verizon being slower, everybody else's 5G speeds are still about 50 to 100% faster than what they were showing with 4G. So there's still a noticeable performance improvement on certain carriers. They did it in 5 cities. So they did Atlanta, Houston, LA, New York, and Washington, D.C. by the looks of it.
Mm-hmm.
And those are metropolitan areas. It's kind of an even race in most cases. The only one that
Mm-hmm.
really stood out to me was T-Mobile's 5G in DC is more than double its 4G speeds and
Mm-hmm.
20 to 30% faster than AT&T and Verizon. And that's kind of all I really noticed. Otherwise, they all look pretty neck and neck.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, how this all progresses. I poked Verizon a little bit this week on Twitter, with their DSS implementation. I mean, they're late to the low band party, right? And that's where I think T-Mobile had, the foresight. It's like they wanted to focus on coverage first as their priority, versus and AT&T as well, Verizon, focusing on that millimeter wave, given the performance aspects of it. So, but we'll continue to monitor that and come back and report that on future podcasts. But hey, another great podcast this week, Anshel, since we didn't have one last week over Thanksgiving. So why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone would like to reach out to us and provide a specific topic for us to cover in a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend and please tune in again next week.